So, Richard, before we talk about your book, Trial Lawyer, we really need to talk about what just happened with the Supreme Court. So could I get a reaction, please, from you to the Supreme Court's decision on both Roe as well as their position on gun control, what it means?
Well, I'm appalled. And my wife was so upset yesterday that she was crying all morning. The court is extraordinarily out of touch with the American people and represents only a minority of not only thinking, but of legal thinking in the United States. We're going to talk about ethics and morality and the intersection of the two, which is important to me. And I believe that the two are intrinsically connected. And I don't see any honest morality coming from the court. You know, the Supreme Court is the only court in the country that doesn't have any ethical guidelines. And they have consistently refused to make ethical guidelines for themselves. And yet, as far back as when I was in college doing my government honors thesis, the subject was that the court makes decisions based on their political and personal ideologies and not based on law. And the decisions about allowing guns on the streets of New York and everywhere else, and denying women the right to control their own bodies, which may result in the right to also denying the right of LGBTQ people to marry. And it may also involve the right of trans people to be who they want to be, is very much a political decision based on the political views of right-wing people who represent only a small minority of the country. I'm very concerned about what happens in the elections this fall and in the elections in 2024.
Richard Zitrin, you're an author again, trial lawyer. Who are you trying to speak to with this book? Since a lot of people don't necessarily think, oh, lawyer, I'm going to read a book about a trial lawyer. So who are you speaking to?
Well, originally, I was speaking to my kids and grandkids. Although I had wanted to write another book, and I've written 3 other books, I wasn't sure that I was going to have the time and energy to write this for publication. But as I got into it, I really wanted my audience to be anybody who's interested in the law and who wants to find out how things really work inside a courtroom. And as time went on, I also wanted to speak to those people whose background is like mine, a privileged white upper middle class background, to say some things about the unfairness of the legal system to many, in fact, most of my clients.
What brought you to the recognition of your own white privilege, and why you kind of, instead of recoiling and shutting up, you actually went in the other direction and sort of dug down deep into your own implicit bias, which a lot of, especially straight white men, do not do. So why did you do that? Where did that come from?
Well, I think it's a long process. It started with my parents, and it started with my going to a summer camp. My parents were doctors, so we had a comfortable lifestyle. And we were told to go to a summer camp that was integrated in the 1950s. There were Black kids who were on scholarship from Harlem. There were Asian kids. There were biracial kids. There were Jewish and non-Jewish kids. This was outside of New York. And that gives one a very good foundation of as a start, but it's only a start. And from there, you have an awareness of everybody is equally valuable, but it's only a beginning for somebody who grows up in a fairly privileged white community, because racism is so endemic and so harmful. Back in those days, we really didn't realize acutely that there's a difference between everybody's equal and everybody's background, culture, and social mores are also equal. That the way Mexican Americans act in their communities, the way Jewish people act, like in my community, the way Black friends of mine act among themselves, that all of those things are valuable in addition to simply saying, well, we're all on the same plane.
If I'm imagining this correctly, at the same time you're talking about going to an integrated summer camp, in the South, kids were being screamed at and having things thrown at just in terms of trying to go to school after Brown v. Board of Education. So how did you reconcile what you could see on your TV around the integration process of the public schools and what your personal experience was with the summer camps?
So the camp experience was something that happened in the late 50s. And one of the there were two significant things about it that particularly resonated with me. My counselor was Black. The favorite counselor of everybody was Black. He used to hold a toothpick in his mouth all the time. He was legendary to us. Everybody looked up to him. And everybody's favorite camper was Black, and he was there on scholarship. He later went to Harvard Medical School and became I believe, a noted neurosurgeon. So that gave us a good heads up in a lot of ways. And there was a disconnect between what was going on in the South and Little Rock, and later a little bit at the University of Mississippi and so on. There was a huge disconnect for us. But for me, understanding or internalizing that was something that's taken a lifetime to really be able to do. It was fortunate for me to have that experience and to say, Winnie Harrison, you are the camper we all look up to, another 13-year-old kid. But that's just the very, very beginning. That enables, in our family, we all spoke to each other about the horrors of what was going on in the South, but we weren't living through it. And that makes a huge difference. Even the fact that one of my classmates in high school, a fellow clarinet player, was driving Dr. King around when he came to New York because his father was one of Dr. King's lawyers. Even that didn't make a real impression, because we weren't in the South. We weren't witnessing it firsthand, the way we have been able to witness what's happened in the past few years with George Floyd and many others. So for me, I had the principle of equality in mind. I played jazz and basketball. I had a lot of Black friends who did those things, and also white friends. But it really wasn't until I was in law school and was hired to work on the San Quentin Six case that I began to get to a higher understanding of exactly what it was that people of color were facing. And it actually wasn't until the last couple of years during COVID that I dug down a lot deeper to really try to understand what was still my own white privilege that was governing my own conduct. And I tried to address that in the book.
Now, we have to say this is 1973, and so cultural mores were very different. politics was very different. But there's something very interesting about the ongoingness of systemic and institutionalized racism. And having written that chapter and the book just coming out, and you're just talking about George Floyd, what do you see in terms of, I mean, do you have any sort of a heartfelt response to the fact that some elements that you talk about in the San Quentin Six could be talked about today and are talked about today?
Well, you've asked a compound question, as we lawyers say. So I'm going to try to answer it in pieces. When I walked into the visitors room of San Quentin, the visiting room that was reserved for the most highly secure prisoners, which included my client, Johnny Spain, my boss's client, I was a law student, I was immediately struck by the horror of what was going on. I'm sure I left that room in shock, and the book details that experience. Johnny came in wearing chains that looked like he was being taken to the auction block, literally being taken to the auction block. And when the 6 defendants of color sat in the courtroom with 25 pounds of chains on them, unable to move their hands away from their bodies enough to be able to write, it was a pretty horrifying experience. So in terms of awareness, that was a huge wake-up call, and frankly, a radicalization of my thoughts about race as a result of what I saw in front of me. And although Johnny was the only one convicted of murder, that conviction was later thrown out because he wore those chains and continually complained about the chains, to the point where he said he couldn't communicate with his lawyer or sometimes even sit in the courtroom. And the racism I saw, and the elitism also, very significantly, the elitism I saw as it relates to poor people of any color, was something that I learned and appreciated. But I'll say this, as I look back in writing this book, the extent of that elitism really resonated with me. I don't think I really appreciated how bad it was while I was doing it, because I was in trial trying to win a case. And as I look back at it, the behavior of some of the people on the other side was just beyond abhorrent. So that was another step in the right direction. But when George Floyd's murder happened and the other incidents about the same time, the death of Breonna and many incidents that followed, preceded that, and many incidents that preceded it, and a few that followed it, was a time for me to really look at myself in terms of what had I learned? Did I need to go back and understand it better? Did I need to dig down deeper? And I was asked by a Bay Area civil rights leader to write something about it for her organization's newsletter. And that turned into a piece called "Being Anti-Racist is Not Enough," that the ABA Journal published and that I stole from, I must say, for the introduction to this book. And one of the things I learned by that is that I was invited by that leader, whose name is Eva Patterson, to speak about these things. And she impressed upon me that white people need to talk about these things too. And it's only been in the past few years that I've really made a much stronger internal effort to dig down, not about my views on race, but about my own baggage that comes with being a straight white male, as you so well put it.
You talk very profoundly about this mission, if you will, to go deep within yourself, to explore who you are, what your views are, and how they impact others. But I want to know why. What was, you've talked about camping, you've talked about your friends, but now at this age, white, straight, male privilege, what's the compulsion? What is the, other than being asked? I mean, you can be asked to do something and find an excuse not to do it, or not find it to be meaningful, or, you have to go to the beach that day. I mean, what is it that compels you to actually take that profound look into yourself and then actually follow it up with work? You actually do something about it. You don't just ponder it. So what's that all about? Where does that come from?
Well, I should say that I've been doing stuff that relates to these issues for a very long time. I've done a lot of pro bono work, done a lot of work with minority communities. When I wrote a textbook in legal ethics, it contained the first chapter about racism and actually gender issues. That was in 1995. So I'm not new to this. And I have for a long time worked in the area of developing equal opportunities for people of all kinds, whether they are, Black, Indigenous, LGBTQ. I knew Harvey Milk when he first came to San Francisco, in the same neighborhood at the same time that I went to San Francisco. As I said, this is a process, and that's always been a big part of my life. Why? Because I hate injustice. I just hate it. It makes me angry. Sometimes my wife tells me it makes me too angry, and has me yelling at some guy who ran a stop sign in front of me. I should be letting those things go and concentrating on the more important things, like what we're talking about now. Or as the book begins with a quote from an excellent ethicist, we don't always know what the right thing to do is, but we know it's wrong. We don't always know the solution, but we know what problems are. And that's what got me really interested. It wasn't what the rules said. It wasn't what the technical aspects of those rules were. It was, what is appropriate professional and personal behavior for a lawyer to undertake and be honorable to her or himself, to themselves in every respect, not only professionally, but personally. And that kind of has been my operating principle. I don't want to represent both sides of the case in a moot court argument. I want to be on my side, the side I believe in. That's what I care about. And law school teaches the contrary. It teaches you to be adept at handling both sides. Why? Why do law schools teach law students to become big firm lawyers and work for gigantic corporations that are going to help us destroy the world? So that's where this ethics stuff really resonated with me. And over the years, got me extremely interested in why courthouse secrecy has prevented the public from knowing extremely important things that would help them be safer, would have saved lives, hundreds of thousands of lives, if only they were known and not kept shrouded by agreements among lawyers and judges. I considered that from the very beginning to be extremely unethical. I taught for many years an introductory orientation course for first-year law students, and I would put 4 words up on the board, and they were truth, justice, ethics, and morality, and asked the students whether they felt that as lawyers they would be seekers of truth. Very few of them would raise their hands. Yeah, because they understood they were there to do their client's bidding. And that's where the what side do you take becomes really important, and where I believe law school teaching is wrong to say take either side. What about justice? Well, they all would raise their hands for justice. But then I would talk about relative justice. Isn't that as relative as truth? And of course it is. We used to use the O.J. Simpson case as an example. Justice for Ron Goldman's father was not served, but justice for most of the Black community, including my friends who are Black attorneys, was served because finally a Black man had gotten the dream team. And also the police conduct in that case was wrong. They got into Simpson's house without a warrant, and it should have been, everything there should have been excluded, and it wasn't. And then we got into a discussion of ethics and morality, and we would just talk about it for about an hour so that people could get a sense of their own selves. Law students don't get a chance to stop and think, well, what's ethical? And they sure don't get a chance to stop and think about what's moral. And it really is two sides of the same coin. But because law students are pressurized to take the exams and succeed and get to the top of the class, and all these competitive young people trying to do that, they sometimes lose sight of both ethics. And to me, it's more important, sister, morality. I think it's exceptionally important that the two be tied together. However, whether you integrate them as I do, or whether you balance them.
So tell me, you brought it up earlier about court secrecy, how you got to believe that court secrecy was so important. It sounds like it's kind of an outgrowth of that teaching about the integration of ethics and morality. How could a court seal documents that clearly show a public harm? I mean, that seems, counterintuitive to justice and serving the public good. What was your aha moment? What was your epiphany in understanding that that kind of shifted where you had been into now that's going to be your mission?
In 1986, I had a case in which my client, who was a poor Latina, was driving down the street in her Dodge van and couldn't steer the car as she was going around a turn on Mission Street, which is one of the main drags in the city, particularly in a Latina neighborhood, and crashed into a building. And we found out that not only was the power steering in those 2 million vans defective, but Dodge sold the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration on a fix for those 2 million vans that was absolutely 100% useless. And this is a chapter in the book. In fact, it's the last chapter in the book because it flipped the issue of elitism that had always hurt my clients kind of on its head as we used their elitism against them. A lot of fun for me to write that chapter. But what happened was, because they thought that we young, primarily criminal defense lawyers didn't know what we were doing, apparently they didn't understand that trying a murder case is more difficult than trying a case like that. They offered us nothing to settle the case, so we went to trial. And we got a huge verdict. And when we got the verdict, all the TV stations wanted to come and interview our client and us. And our client was camera shy, but we went on TV and we explained exactly what the defect was in the original steering and what the defect was with their stupid fix. And then we wrote a couple of articles in national periodicals about it. And the word was out. If anyone had a Dodge Sportsman or Tradesman van, they would be able to go in and fix it right, not the way that it was done by Chrysler Corporation. And that got me thinking, why is it that if we don't go to trial, this stuff remains secret? At that time, in the late 80s and early 90s and through the 90s, it was mostly secrecy deals between the lawyers on each side. When the lawyer finally pushed the right button and got the magic information in discovery, the other side, the defense lawyer, would call up that lawyer and say, tell you what, if you keep all the information secret, you return it all to us, we'll settle with you. But that doesn't help the public. And I realized then, as early as the mid-90s, that was really grotesquely unfair. I wrote a chapter in my last trade book about that, called Secret Settlements, Why What the Public Doesn't Know Will Hurt Them. What you don't know will hurt you. And ever since then, it's been kind of a mission of mine to try to undo that. It just seems like it's extraordinarily unethical for anybody to keep that information secret from the public when lives are being lost, when people are crashing cars, and people are taking OxyContin without knowing that Purdue is lying about it, and so on. None of this stuff is confidential information between a lawyer and a client. This is the stuff that comes out in discovery in the litigation of a case. And all of that stuff should be public. And it has been public forever. But once the discovery stopped being filed in the court, which happened about 40 years ago, then the idea occurred, hey, maybe we just keep it secret and then no one will catch us. And that's why I got so intensely involved.
And so what next for you? I mean, you are, as a philanthropist, you have funded the Richard Zitrin anti-court secrecy position at Public Justice, for which we're very happy. Thank you very much.
So particularly with Public Justice, where I've made this endowment, which is, way beyond anything the foundation had previously ever done before, the anti-secrecy work that I do is exceptionally important to me. I've considered it my life's work for the past 25 years. And I got to the point where I thought, well, I'm getting older. Maybe it's time to take a big chunk of money and try to find who would be deserving of having it and what would be the focus of that. And I actually approached Paul Bland in Public Justice about doing that rather than the other way around. Not that I was unaware of Public Justice. I've been contributing to them for many years. But when I thought about let's do something big, this is the first one. And yes, being involved, I call it putting your mouth where your money is.
Yeah, and hopefully with this bill, SB 1149, we'll see the beginning of at least some attention, some public attention, as well as legislative attention to the fight against court secrecy. Richard, I really am so thrilled to be able to talk to you, not only about your book, but to get to know you a bit. And I really appreciate it.